4 News presents special live coverage of President Reagan's trip to the Quad Cities.
Good afternoon. I'm Phil Dawson, and we're happy you can be with us for what we expect will be an exciting and busy afternoon. Here is we follow President Reagan in the Quad Cities during his visit to our town this afternoon. The President's plane, Air Force One, has not yet landed at the Quad Cities Airport in Moline. He's coming here from Marion, Illinois, where he spent the morning looking at drought damage and talking to farmers. That's a live picture of the airport. The press plane full of reporters covering the President is about to land in Moline, and that means Air Force One is close behind. We're going to take a commercial break, and we'll be right back with live coverage of the President's arrival and his afternoon visiting us here in the Quad Cities, so stay tuned. President Reagan aboard Air Force One is expected any minute at the Quad Cities Airport, and that's where Jeff Rudolph is. He's live at the airport out in Moline. Jeff, any guesstimate on when exactly the President's plane will arrive?
Well, the President's plane is arriving right now. Air Force One is getting ready to land at the Quad City Airport. President Reagan spent time in southern Illinois this afternoon touring some drought-stricken farms. I understand that President Reagan has some proposals to help the drought-stricken farmers. President Reagan's plane coming in for landing right now. If you can see that off in the distance, those 3 white lights. He should be arriving at the Quad City Airport any time now. President Reagan, after arriving here, he will spend about 5 minutes greeting dignitaries from both sides of the river and then go over to the new studios of KIIK in Davenport to dedicate that facility and spend some time on the air. President Reagan is right on time.
Jeff, we didn't hear some of what you had to say. Is that the President's plane arriving now?
Yes, that is the President's plane. That's Air Force One coming into the Quad City Airport right now. Those 3 bright lights. He should be landing any time now. The press plane came in about 5 to 10 minutes ago.
Randy Polo.
As I said earlier, he will spend about 5 to 10 minutes over here at the airport greeting dignitaries. They are lined up well behind the area where the Air Force One is scheduled to taxi in.
I'm going to try to get on the press boat. Go back to Palmer College, library.
Nancy Reagan will not be with the President.
Give me 5 minutes.
He's only...
You don't hear from me in 5 minutes. Just go ahead and leave. L21 library.
The governors of Iowa and Illinois are going to be ready to meet him when he gets off the plane. We don't know if U.S. Agriculture Secretary Richard Lang is on that plane with the President.
Jeff, where are you relative to the airplane right now? You're how far away?
We are approximately, I would say, about maybe a quarter of a mile away from the President's plane right now. It's very crowded conditions up here in the media area. We should be able to see the President's plane coming in and taxiing in just a few minutes.
You're there on a platform with a bunch of reporters from the national press?
No, the national press is off to my right. These are the local people, the people from Cedar Rapids. We've got some, of course, local media as well.
So you don't have to push and shove with all those bullies from the national press?
No, they're off to the side. All of our buddies over in the networks, they're well out of our way. We don't have to deal with them, but things are still very crowded up here, and we'll try to get the best shots we can of the President's plane coming in. As far as the crowd goes, people have been kept all the way back by the Howard Johnsons. That's a good stretch away, and I'm afraid that people who came here to try to see President Reagan, they're not going to get a very good shot of him. They might see his motorcade passing on through, but as far as being able to see the President, your best bet is to watch it live.
Jeff, do you think you're going to be close enough to shout any questions at the President, you know, a la Sam Donaldson?
Well, we'll try to do that. The president should only pass maybe 10 feet from the press truck here, and we'll see what we can do as far as getting any kind of response from the president. Maybe some details about the drought package that he is going to provide for the drought-stricken farmers.
So there's a lot of security out there. The people who have come to see the president are being kept a good distance away. Roads, I understand, have been blocked in the area of the airport. Everybody who's in there had to get in there very early before the arrival of the president's plane.
Yes, they scanned the area for bombs, and they spent a good 2 hours this morning going through every detail you might be able to imagine about the president's visit. We just have a few dignitaries down here, maybe 50 to 100, but otherwise the general public is not going to be down to see anything of the president here at the Quad City Airport. Now, hearing me right now could be very difficult. Here comes the president's plane. It is coming into view right now. Air Force One taxiing.
There are no brass bands or welcoming committees that we can see, Jeff. Are there any there out of the camera's eye?
As far as what we've been able to see, there are no official welcoming committees. They might be coming out later on as soon as the president gets off the plane. Now we've got the national press that's coming toward Air Force One.
To address the worsening drought conditions here in the Midwest, the first part of his visit is largely ceremonial.
Now we have the dignitaries coming up toward the plane. We have Iowa Governor Terry Branstad, Moline Mayor Robert Anderson. I see Scott County Supervisor Maggie Tinsman and also Iowa Representative Hugo Schneckloth. A very small number of dignitaries coming toward the plane. Now we see the president's car that's coming toward the plane. The president's not going to spend a whole lot of time outside here. He's going to be whisked into that car as soon as possible.
Lucky for him, it's probably about 100 degrees out there right now.
It feels like 130 out here with humidity at 120% if there was such a thing. It's extremely hot and very uncomfortable out here. If the president wanted to see the drought conditions, he certainly came at a proper time. We are at the old terminal at the Quad City Airport. In case you might have been confused, the new terminal is a good quarter of a mile away from here. The president should be getting off the plane shortly. There's the 16th Congresswoman from Illinois, Lynn Martin, followed by Congressman Jim Leach.
There's the governor of Illinois. I recognize him.
Governor of Illinois.
Jim Thompson. Marlin Fitzwater, the president's spokesman.
Yes, Marvin Fitzwater, the spokesman for the White House. And, of course, as far as we know, Nancy Reagan will not be on this trip. The president, of course, is only going to spend about 2.5 hours in the Quad Cities.
Well, there's the president.
President Reagan greeting the crowd. Richard Lang, the U.S. Agriculture Secretary, is with the president. The president seems to be unbothered, or not bothered at all by the heat. Of course, he hadn't spent a whole lot of time outside today, probably, but...
Yeah, I suspect he'll hop quickly into his air-conditioned limousine, don't you?
And I'm sure Air Force One has also got its ample supply of air conditioning. President Reagan chatting with Moline Mayor Robert Anderson.
I'd have thought there'd be more dignitaries out there, Jeff. Everybody likes to get their picture taken with the president.
Well, we've got at least 2 or 3 other mayors who could be here. I don't know why there are not more dignitaries out here. Pretty soon the president is going to be shaking hands with Iowa State Representative Hugo Schneckloth, who represents an area north of the Quad Cities in Eldridge. Of course, that area has been hard hit by the record drought. Iowa Governor Terry Branstad has walked away from the president. He is walking toward the president's limousine. President Reagan now chatting with Maggie Tinsman, the Scott County supervisor.
Does it look like Governor Branstad is trying to hitch a ride in the limousine so he can talk personally with the president?
I'm not sure what the governor's plans are. He's not anywhere really near the president right now.
Oh, I thought you said he was walking toward the limousine. I didn't understand.
Yeah, he's walking on the other side of the limousine. There is the president getting inside the limousine, as is Governor Branstad from the opposite side.
So Governor Branstad is hitching a ride?
Apparently so.
Mr. President!
But it looks as if the president will not get close enough for us to ask any questions of him. I guess those questions will have to wait until later on in the afternoon.
I heard somebody hollering. That was one of the other reporters?
That was one of the other reporters to the right of me. That question came, unfortunately, as the president was entering the limousine. I don't know whether he had a chance to hear that question. Actually, it was just Mr. President. No question was asked, but President's limousine getting ready to take off. He's waving at some of the dignitaries.
Now, what's the travel time, do you suppose, for the limousine from the airport to WOC Radio, the first stop on the president's itinerary in the Quad Cities, Jeff?
Well, normal driving time would be somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. I'm sure with this kind of escort that he's going to get, he should be able to arrive at the studios of WOC KIIK, I'd say at least within 15 minutes. There goes the president's limousine leaving the Quad City Airport.
Those other vehicles, are they security or...
Secret Service people are along in that caravan as well as some of the dignitaries. Of course, the governors of Iowa and Illinois. The crowd is beginning to thin out right now.
Now, who are those people that we're looking at in the foreground? Are those reporters, or some of them, I guess, are dignitaries?
Those are all dignitaries and the families of the dignitaries. So it appears that the first stage of the president's trip and the president's arrival in the Quad Cities, that has come to a close. We're getting set for stage 2, and that would be the arrival of the president at the new studios of WOC KIIK Radio in Davenport. He'll spend maybe an hour there, and then he'll be on his way over to Palmer Auditorium to deliver a speech and perhaps tell us more about the package of proposals that he's going to have for the relief of the drought-stricken farmers.
So far, so good. Everything has gone routinely, and you're there with Air Force One behind you. Boy, they sure do take care of that plane. It looks like a shined-up Rolls-Royce back there.
Not too many other planes like Air Force One. It's magnificent to see the sight. A gleaming plane that I'm sure has all the comforts of home.
Kind of gives you goosebumples when you see that pull up and land on the air runway there. Well, Jeff, thank you very much. And we'll be coming back to you, of course, when the president departs on Air Force One at the end of his visit. We'll talk to you in a little while.
Thank you.
Well, the president has already had a busy morning traveling in southern Illinois. He came to see firsthand how farmers are struggling during our drought. Kathy Randall has a report on where the president went, what he saw, and what he said.
The president spent about 25 minutes on his helicopter Marine One flying over corn and soybean fields. He then headed to a briefing from agricultural officials at the DuQuoin State Fairgrounds and a tour of farmer Herman Crone's 2,800-acre farm. Although Crone's farm has had nearly 2 inches of rain this week and some parts of southern Illinois have had up to 4 inches, Crone says he is still facing a $35,000 loss on his corn crop.
Well, I think it's a great tragedy, as anyone can see.
The president pointed out the tassels of the corn and explained how they must be developed for pollination.
This It pollinates.
The president is carrying a package of proposals the White House says will help many farmers who will suffer substantial losses in the drought. He compared this dry spell to the Dust Bowl of 1936.
I have a hunch that this is more widespread than that one was. That came from further to the west.
The president told farmers he can't make it rain, but can help to ease the pain. The White House says Reagan will sign relief legislation making its way through Congress, provided the cost-raising amendments are not tacked on. Kathy Randall, 4 News, DuQuoin, Illinois.
Well, President Reagan's motorcade is on the way to WOC Radio in Davenport now, and while we wait for the motorcade to get close to its destination, we're going to take a short commercial break. We'll be right back. Well, it could be another 7, 8, maybe only 5 minutes, depending on how quickly the motorcade travels from the airport to WOC Radio in Davenport. Carla Christensen is live at WOC right now, where I guess it's pretty exciting. Everybody's waiting for the president's arrival, right, Carla?
You bet. There have been people standing out here for about the last hour and a half. You may be able to see over to my left, your right, about, I'm guessing, 300 people who have begun to line the streets. We've had a little bit of squad car action, some vans, a Secret Service van, a tow truck, come rushing up Kimberly Road. You are also looking now at Kimberly Road, headed north in front of the WOC KIIK studios. KIIK studios are located now just north of Duck Creek Plaza, and this is where the president will be coming to dedicate their new building. President Reagan worked here, his first job out of college, as a sports announcer, and he will be coming here to reminisce with some old friends and to talk with the new employees of KIIK. We heard yesterday that the employees had a lottery to decide who would be the lucky 16 people who would get to go inside the building. As you can see, security is very tight here, but not as tight, we hear, as at Palmer Auditorium, because the risk to the president is not nearly so dangerous here, they say, as it is at Palmer Auditorium, because he will not be exposed to the public. He will be coming in when the motorcade arrives, pulling into the parking lot, and perhaps we can take a look at where he'll go back to the back of the building over here. This has all been cornered off, and no one else will be allowed into the parking lot. The people are being kept behind roped-off lines and barricades, and he will go through the parking lot and be whisked in the back door without the public or, unfortunately, our camera being able to see him on the outside. We do have a remote live camera that will be inside that will be with us for the dedication. Now, we can hear a helicopter overhead. And, of course, Kimberly is all sectioned off. Perhaps we should go back over to the road and wait so that you can see at the same time we can see the motorcade arriving. We can hear the helicopters, and the police are standing a little more at attention, getting a little more ready, I think, for this great presidential visit. Well,
the helicopters, as we understand, are probably security, because we wanted to fly a helicopter over the motorcade and photograph it as it went from the airport to Davenport, and we were told by the Secret Service that we may not do that, that would jeopardize the president's security. Can you tell by looking at them what kind of helicopters they are, Carl?
We can't see them yet. We can only hear them, but you're absolutely right about no one being able to take a helicopter up while the president is in town. The security and safety precautions that are taken for the president's arrival are just really incredible. When you talk about the motorcade, you're talking about local police, Secret Service, you're talking about an ambulance that carries not only 2 paramedics, but the president arrives with his personal physician and personal paramedic. Now, you're not going to be able to see it. We'll stay trained on the street, but the helicopter is flying behind our camera overhead and is now circling the Signal Hill Communications WOC KIIK studios, checking out the crowd, probably taking a look at us and making sure that we're all right.
Every time the president goes anywhere, it's amazing that they have to amass this kind of security team, local, national, aerial, on the ground.
It truly is, and what even the employees of the studios go through to be able to be in their own workplace, even though they're well-known and have long records and histories here, they still had to go through a security check by the Secret Service. The Secret Service has been in town for a couple of weeks preparing for this visit, and of course they want to make absolutely certain nothing would go wrong, as we would hope it would not in our city when he comes back here to his not his hometown, but one of the towns that he lived in during his career.
Okay. Okay, Carla, we're going to come right back to you. I guess we've got another couple of minutes before the President's motorcade arrives. But in the meanwhile, Carla has alluded to the fact that these preparations have been going on for some time. At WOC Radio, they found out at least a week or so ago that the President was coming, and boy, they went crazy. They have been preparing and working late hours and drawing straws, as Carla mentioned, getting ready for the President's arrival. We have a short report on what's been going on over there in the last couple of days.
This is radio at WOC today.
Star Motors, co-owned company, Japanese-American.
And this is Radio WOC when Ronald Reagan manned the sports mic, fresh out of Eureka College back in 1932. The studios are a little different and a lot newer today, and that's the reason Mr. Reagan will come here, to dedicate them on WOC's 65th anniversary.
The last week has just been frantic, getting all of the resources together to pull this off. What's beautiful about it is working with the White House staff. They really are professional. They're very good people. They're very well trained. They're very logical, and they know exactly what they need to do. And working with them has been, honestly, just a pleasure.
In conjunction with his dedication, the President will also go live on the air for a 15-minute interview. Mark Minnick, WOC News Director, gets the honor.
Don't look for me to get any international problems solved or questions asked. We're going to talk about radio as it was then, and I hope to ask him a little bit about the drought, because that's, I think, the main reason that he's in the Midwest. Since he was first behind the mic here, he's back at the mic 50-some-odd years later. So we'll see what he has to say.
Having the President in town, let alone in your own building, is an experience to remember. And the folks at WOC are doing their best to take advantage of a good situation. Don Click, 4 News, Davenport.
Well, in just a minute or two.
All right, you can see, here comes the motorcade. Right behind me, you can see 2 police cars. Those are local Davenport police on motorcycles, 3 of them leading the way. Behind them, a state patrol car. And here comes the presidential motorcade. Perhaps we can get him to give us a wave when they come through. There he goes. There we saw Governor Thompson, Illinois Governor Jim Thompson. There's President Reagan right there. He's waving at our camera. I think Denny Witt is following, our cameraman following him through. Now, as I said, they're going to whip the presidential motorcade around behind. They're readjusting some of the positions so that the Secret Service, we can see, is now pulling up so that the Secret Service van is between the presidential motorcade, or rather car, and the rest of the motorcade. Everybody has very set positions. You can see a network news crew there filming off the back of a station wagon. I'm glad that we don't have that job. I don't think that that looks like much fun. You can also see, there you can see the news crews. All of the network news crews, we see 5 of them right at this time coming in. They've all been told exactly where they will park. You can see they have set positions. There's someone telling them where to go just in case they didn't get it straight during their instructions over the last 2 weeks. Now we see some of the dignitaries, and these vans are all full of the national press that travel with President Reagan whenever he goes anywhere. Whenever he leaves town, all of the national press get ready and go with him. Coming in, we can try to see perhaps the medic van. They'll be driving into your shot. I'm in a different position and not able to tell exactly what you're seeing. There comes the medic van. That's with Kevin Tacos, who we talked with yesterday. They had to be prepared and have security clearance. Now, the medic ambulance will be moved right up front by the door of Signal Hill Communications, where President Reagan will be going in. And we are going to take a little spot here, I guess, and talk about what he's going to be doing inside that conference room when he comes back for this visit to his station.
Well, Carl, I don't think we're going to take that just yet, but we do understand that the President is going to go in and help them dedicate the snazzy new building there at WOC, the place where he began his career. Right now, the President is walking into the building. We have a camera in the building, and I think we're able to see that now. The camera in the building is a pool camera being provided by WOC Signal Hill Communications. And
there we go, Phil. Okay, I can just see the picture. I can just see the picture now.
Carla, you said they drew lots to see who would be the lucky people allowed inside for the ceremony?
That's right. I was getting a cross signal on the audio there. Yes, they did draw lots, and there will be 16 people allowed into this room from the employees. There are 67 employees currently at WHBF KIIK, and they put their names in a hat. Now we can see there the national press coming into the room, trying to line up, and they'll make sure that all of those folks get their cameras lined up and ready to go before they allow President Reagan, of course, to walk into the room. I can tell you a few of the people who will be in the room if you'd like.
Sure, point them out.
Okay. Some of the folks who will be inside are both the Iowa and Illinois governors. They will have some folks who used to work at WOC with President Reagan when he was here. There are some old-timers who have come back. There was an accounting clerk by the name of Lou Moja who remembers Ronnie Reagan when he used to work at WOC, and she'll have an opportunity.
I read where she said he was kind of a jokester.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Well, I understand he still likes to tell a good story now and then.
Well, there's a lot
of... The president does.
He sure does, and in fact, a couple of books have been written on Reagan's wit and how he always manages to keep a sense of humor. I think we all sort of remember during the assassination attempt when he was able to keep a sense of humor and check and laugh with the Secret Service agents.
Well, Carla, isn't it true that he was fired from WOC for violating policy in one way or another?
Well, you know what he did? He didn't pay attention to the commercials, and we all know in broadcasting we have to make sure we get those commercials on. He was supposed to run a commercial for Runge Mortuary. Runge Mortuary sponsored a half an hour of music late at night, and Ronald Reagan played a song, Drink to Thine Eyes Only, I believe was the title, but I'm not quite sure. But he didn't want to mention Runge Mortuary in connection with that song, and boy, did he get in trouble the next day.
But boy, wouldn't it be fun to come back to a radio station where you were fired as the President of the United States, and they'd be rolling out the red carpets and say, gee, what a mistake we made, and we wish we would have never fired you, and we should have made you the boss instead.
Sure, Phil, we can just see the governors walking in now. The governor of Iowa, Terry Branstad, and the governor of Illinois, Jim Thompson, the tall man there on the right.
You can always see Jim Thompson. He towers above everybody.
He sure does. He stands out. There's Chuck. I'm not sure if I can see that's Chuck Harrison or not. I'm having a hard time because I'm still outside watching a TV monitor right along with you. But we're also told that Vicki Palmer Miller will be inside. She is the current owner of WOC KIIK, and she is in a yellow dress. Perhaps she is just entering now. I'm not quite able to tell. Perhaps you'll be able to spot her. She has blonde hair and a yellow dress on today. She will be there with her staff. The general manager, Wayne Blick, is inside along with Jim and Ginny O'Hara, who are the operations managers. And Dorothy Boyd, who's a famous name in this community. She works with Broadway Theater League, and for many, many, many years was the promotions director at WOC. She was not there, however, at the time Ronald Reagan was in, but she was still asked to come back and take part and be one of the honored few in this room.
Well, this building is several months old. They've occupied that building for some time now, but they decided to have some kind of a ceremony to coincide with the president's visit.
That's right. They decided to hold the dedication for, as you might imagine anyone would, the president to come in and actually dedicate the new Signal Hill buildings. When President Reagan was here, he was in the WOC that was on the top of the Palmer School, and that's where he actually did his broadcasting. Way back then, WOC KIIK has moved several times. This is probably their 4th location since Ronald Reagan has been there. But he broadcast out the top of Palmer School, and you know, his first job was announcing a U of I football game. He was out at the University of Iowa and made the calls and did the highlights for the football game. Now, I'm not sure if I just saw Harold Heath walk in, who was a sales manager over here.
Do you suppose they're taking him on a tour of the building now? Is that why he's not in there for the dedication, or?
No, I don't think there were any plans for a tour at this point. I think they're just waiting for everyone to get in and get settled.
Oh, I see.
All of the motorcade dignitaries and security staff. And once they have everyone in and settled and secure, they'll probably bring him in formally.
Well, Carl, I'm wondering which one of our reporters are going to get the chance to shout a question at the president.
Well,
Jeff Rudolph didn't get the opportunity. Do you think you'll get close enough to,
I would love the opportunity, but unfortunately, I think I'm going to be watching President Reagan on television along with the rest of you, even though I'm standing right outside. They've pretty much secured the area. Perhaps Kathleen Seith, who is over at Palmer Auditorium, where he's giving his speech, will be bold enough to be able to get a question out. But unfortunately, it looks like I'll see him on TV only. I'm sure you're bold enough, Carla. It's just a matter of getting in the right location. There, you're right, Phil. You're absolutely right. You know, when President Reagan worked at WOC, he made $100 a month. What do you think about that? Now,
well, in those days.
You can see everyone standing, Phil. There's President Reagan with Vicki Palmer Miller, the owner.
Welcome to Signal Hill. Mr. President, Governors Branstad and Thompson, Congressman Leach, Mayor Hart, and friends. During this year of WOC's 65th anniversary of fine broadcasting, it is fitting that we gather here today for the dedication of the new Signal Hill Communications Facility. The name Signal Hill originated during the early days when my father, Dave Palmer, would display a flag high atop Brady Street Hill, indicating the weather for the day, such as S for snow, F for fair, R for rain, and so on. People referred to this as Signal Hill. Today, of course, we have a new Signal Hill Communications, but the tradition of service to this community remains the same. The changes which have taken place from WOC's humble beginnings at Palmer School to its current state-of-the-art operations are obvious. But some of the occurrences during WOC's early history are difficult to compete with. For instance, the foresight of our program manager, Peter MacArthur, to hire a talented young man just out of college named Dutch Reagan as our sportscaster and radio announcer. I know if Mr. MacArthur and my father, Dave Palmer, could be with us today, this would be their proudest hour. It is indeed my great honor to welcome back to WOC our most famous alumnus. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the President of the United States.
Well, Vicki, first let me say I'm delighted to be back here with all of you. Perhaps some of you know about a huge favor that I owe a lady from Chicago. It was back in 1932. I had just gotten out of college, and this was in the depths of the Depression, and you didn't think about career right then or what you might want to do in the long haul. You just thought about, is there any way to get a job with 26% unemployment rate? And Montgomery Ward had just moved into Dixon, Illinois, and they were going to have a sports department, and they thought they'd get someone who'd had a background of high school sports there. So I went down. I didn't get the job. One of a more recent high school basketball player got it. And then I hit the road hitchhiking, and I went into Chicago and up to NBC. I thought if you were going to start asking for radio, which is what I had thought about I would like to do, well, you might as well start at the top. And I didn't get hired there, but the young lady that I mentioned, I aspired to be a sportscaster. That's what I wanted to do. And this young lady that happened to be in the program department, I guess maybe saw that I was very discouraged and thought maybe I setting my sights too high, and she assured me that no, I hadn't. But she said, you've come to the wrong place. You must go to the smaller towns and the smaller stations where they can afford to take on a newcomer and someone without experience and give them the experience. Well, it was a long hitchhike back to Dixon, Illinois that night. By the way, for the last 30-mile stretch, I got a ride with a fellow who told me quite unnecessarily that he'd been out trapping skunks. But the following Monday, I took her advice, and my first stop was here in Davenport, where, as we used to say in those days, the West begins and where the tall corn grows. And I went in for an interview with the program director, Peter MacArthur. He had come to this country with Harry Lauder, a great vaudevillian in a vaudeville act, and wound up as the program director. And no, there was nothing here. As a matter of fact, the day before, they'd hired an announcer. So now I'm really upset, and as I'm going out the door, I said, how does a fella ever get to be a sports announcer if he can't get a job in radio? And I got to the elevator, and fortunately it wasn't there, because I heard a thumping down the hall. Pete had arthritis very severely and walked on with two canes, and he kept calling me, and rather profanely, and finally I realized what he was coming after me, so I waited. And he asked me what was that I said about sports. And I said, well, that's what I'd like to be, as a sports announcer. He said, what do you know about football? And I said, I played it 8 years. He said, can you tell me about a football game, and if I'm listening to it on radio, then I'll be able to see that game? And I said, I think so. He took me into a studio, his original studio, stood me up in front of a microphone, pointed to a red bulb up on the wall, and he said, I won't be in here with you. You'll be alone. When that red light goes on, you start broadcasting an imaginary football game. Well, there I stood, and I was all alone, and I thought, what am I going to do for names? And then I said, wait a minute. One of our games in the previous season, when I was playing, we won in the last 20 seconds with a 65-yard touchdown run by our quarterback. And I said, well, I know a lot of the other team's names, and I know all of our team's names. I'll start with the fourth quarter. So when it came on, I said the long blue shadows are settling over the field. There's a chill wind blowing in through the end of the stadium. We didn't have a stadium. We only had bleachers. And then I took us for as long as I could go up to the point that there we were, and called that play with 20 seconds to go, and the winning touchdown is scored, at which point I grabbed the microphone and said, that's all. Incidentally, I personally take credit for the first instant replay, because on that famous play, I was the key blocker of the first man in the secondary, and I missed my man. I don't know to this day how Bud Cole scored that touchdown, but in that broadcast, I delivered a block that was just earth-shattering. Well, Pete came back in, and he said, be here Saturday. We'll give you $5 in bus fare. You're broadcasting the Iowa-Minnesota game. So I was there Saturday. Over to Iowa City we went. And then I found out that one of his experienced staff announcers, he had along for safety's sake, and had agreed that we would alternate quarters, and that he would do a quarter, I would do a quarter, and so forth. And I guess that was for protection, in case my imagination couldn't help me. But I'll never forget the thrill of when we were coming up. I was finishing the third quarter, and then he was going to do the fourth, and I saw a note come down from Pete, who was sitting behind us in the press box. And the note, I could see it myself as the other announcer read it, said, let the kid finish the game. So after that, he told me that they had 4 more games left in the season for broadcasting, and I was going to get $10 a game and bus fare. Then I had to wait a few months after the games were over, before there was a vacancy. And then I went on, and I'm proud to have gotten my start in communications here at WOC. But I'm even prouder to have been a part of a tremendous broadcasting tradition, one that is 65 years old this year. And I think all of you can be proud, not just of this new building, but of all that it represents. WOC has been serving the people of the Quad Cities for more than 6 decades. When I first came here, it was only the Tri-Cities. We were in the midst of the Depression, and today we're in the middle of an economic boom, though we must get some help to the farmers who've been hurt by the drought. But through good times and bad, WOC has been there for the people of Iowa and Illinois. You've established high standards of service to the community, and it's my hope that those standards will remain as much a part of your tradition as they have been in the past. Things have changed a bit since 1932, but in a funny way, the business stays the same. news, sports, weather, information. It's a good way to make a living and a good way of serving others. So my congratulations to all of you and my warmest wishes for your future success. I want to say one more word about farmers that I said earlier today over in Illinois. Once when I was just out on the mashed potato circuit and before I ever had this job, I was invited to address the Farm Bureau's national meeting at Las Vegas, Nevada. And on the way to the hall where they were holding their convention, some fella recognized me, I suppose from the picture days, and asked me what I was doing in Las Vegas, and I told him I was there to speak to the Farm Bureau. And he said, "What's a bunch of farmers doing in Las Vegas?" And I couldn't resist. I said, "Buster, they're in an occupation that makes a Las Vegas crap table look like a guaranteed annual income." And it's true. Our farmers deserve all the help we can give them, and we're going to give them that help there now. But thank you all. God bless you all.
Mr. President, would you join me to unveil the plaque?
Very pleased.
Ready?
Oh, my goodness. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you.
Could you please join me at the mic again, please?
Yes.
I would like to hand you this photograph to
I was wondering who that fellow was.
We thought we'd give you your own copy to commemorate your days that you spent here at WOC. And thank you very much for being here today.
Well, thank you very much. It's a photographic trick. I was never that young. Thank you very much. And thank you all.
Would you please join me and we'll take you up to the broadcast studio.
All right.
There you see President Reagan walking out of the dedication ceremony for Signal Hill Communications, WOC, and KIIK Radio. I think, Phil, that we heard a little bit of that Reagan wit that we were talking about before the dedication ceremony when he was given the photograph of Dutch Reagan as a young man at the WOC mic, and he said, "Boy, I wondered who that fellow was." He also had good words for the people, the employees of Signal Hill Communications when he talked about the business and said broadcasting still was news, sports, weather, and information, a good way to make a living, and I guess I'd have to agree with him on that point. He said that he came to WOC in 1932 and he owes it all to a lady from Chicago and hitchhiking, and of course Peter MacArthur, who so many of us here remember as the man who said WOC Davenport, where the West begins, where the tall corn grows. And we have a few pictures of Dutch Reagan back in those early days when he first began at WOC. Reagan's first love, sports. After his college days at Eureka, he wanted to be a sports announcer on the radio. He really wanted to be a sports announcer on a big market Chicago station, but Chicago wouldn't have an inexperienced college kid. Instead, he tried the stations a day's drive away from his hometown of Dixon. And at WOC, he convinced the program manager that he could make him believe that he was actually watching a football game when Reagan was announcing. And that final picture we saw there, Phil, is of course the picture that the folks at Signal Hill Communications gave to President Reagan today.
Well, Carla, you know, in the president's speech today, or his little talk there, it was easy to see why he was such a success as a sportscaster, or at least why the people at WOC saw his potential. The bit about getting a ride with a skunk trapper to the Quad Cities, that was great stuff. He's just so effective in that forum, in that intimate little setting like that.
He is the great communicator, as they say.
Farmers are in a job that makes a Las Vegas crap table look like a guaranteed income.
Yeah, and it seems as if he almost pulls it off the top of his head as he's talking, that he is never prepared, which of course, as we know, is the trick to the business.
Well, Carla, now he's going upstairs, I believe, to one of the studios at the new WOC on Signal Hill, and he's going to be interviewed.
That's correct. He will be interviewed by Mark Minnick and John Bauman, who are two news people who've been with WOC KIIK, and his broadcast will be simulcast on WOC and KIIK radio stations, and we hope to bring that to you live. He has to make the trip from one end of the building in the basement all the way upstairs into the opposite end of the building to be able to make it into the studios. And while he is in the studio, we will not be able to give you live video, but we will be able to bring you video later tonight at 6 o'clock, because we're allowed to have a pool camera for all of us to take video, and they're going to walk that by while he's on the air.
But we will carry the audio portion.
Correct.
Of Bauman's, Mr. Bauman's and Mr. Minnick's interview. And from what I understand, the interview will not be about Middle East policy or other significant issues of our time, but more of a reminiscing about the President's days at WOC. That's correct. He will not be discussing any policy, and as I understand, not even the drought policy of the farmers, but instead he will be talking about the old days. Do you know if he's going to accept any, I know at WOC in this time period they normally have a telephone call-in program. Do you know, is the President going to accept any telephone calls from the public? No, he will not be accepting any phone calls from the public, as we understand. And in fact, when President Carter was here, they were talking about doing a call-in program, but they set up the calls, and actually the radio station called to pre-planned folks to talk with them about those questions. But President Reagan will not accept any questions other than those by the announcers. Okay, Carla, we'll talk a little later. While we wait for the President to get from downstairs to the studio upstairs, we're going to take a short commercial break, and we'll be right back.
But Mark Minnick is standing by now with President Ronald Reagan.
Thank you, John. Well, it's been a few years, and we are delighted to have you back before a microphone at WOC, Mr. President.
Well, I'm very pleased to be here.
Some things haven't changed. There were long velvet curtains when you were in the studios above Palmer College, and we have curtains here today. These studios, when you first got here, a freshly scrubbed young man out of Eureka College, did it take you very long to get a job? I know you had to audition that football game. I'm not going to make you do that for sure.
Oh, well, I have to tell you that, no, I was very lucky. I graduated in June of that year, 1932, and went back in order to get some money in those dark Depression days. It was the very depth of the Depression. And went back to the job that I'd been doing for 6 previous years for the summer, and that was lifeguarding in the Rock River over at Dixon, Illinois. And then at the end of the summer, I'd made up my mind that this was what I wanted to do, in sports announcing particularly. So I started out hitchhiking around to find a station that would give me a chance, and this one I came to and crossed the river and came here, and Peter MacArthur was the man who gave me the very unusual audition when he heard sports announcing was an idea of mine. He stood me in front of a microphone and told me when the light came on to start broadcasting an imaginary football game, and I did for about 15 minutes, and when I came back he told me, be here Saturday, we'll give you $10 in bus fare, you're broadcasting the Iowa-Minnesota game.
I don't think they had the Floyd of Rosedale trophy at that time, but they've since come up with this pig that they give away to the winner of the game. At that time, I noticed in your book you said you were hired, fired, and rehired at WOC.
Well, yes. Then after the several football games that I broadcast were over, there was no place regularly for me, but they said they thought there would be, and so I went home, and I waited until around February before I got a call that there was an opening. Then I became a staff announcer who on the side would handle sporting events. And I came here, and one night I felt to my duty to introduce the mortuary feature, in which we used the mortuary's organ for popular music and so forth, but nobody told me that the arrangement was that they got a kind of a commercial plug in return for furnishing their facility and their organ. And so I just sounded off without it, and that caused a little rumpus. But anyway, there had been a man that they had been talking to and offering a job to for some time before, and he came here, and I was told that I was out. But he came. Well, when he found out that he had thought that there was an actual vacancy, and when he found out that, no, I was leaving, he insisted on a contract to guarantee that...
Which made the folks blanch.
Yes. And they wouldn't do it, and so they came to me and told me I was unfired.
Friday, we've had a very good luck of having a couple of Reagans. Moon Reagan, your brother, I believe, came to work here. Well, I don't remember. I think he was program director for a time.
Yes. Yes, and then he left the actual broadcasting business to become a vice president of McCann Erickson Advertising Agency. But, yes, he graduated from college a year after me. He's my older brother. But in the roaring 20s, when he got out of high school, that was before the crash, the job seemed to be so good that never mind college. But when I made it for 1 year, working my way through, he decided that, well, maybe he'd like to do that too. And so having played on a championship high school team, between myself and the coach, we managed to find a job for him on the campus, and he came to college. So I became the older brother, and I was the sophomore and he was the freshman. But then when he got out of school, he came over to see me, and I ended up getting him some things to do.
The 30s, have given us a lot of the programming ideas that we still use today, perhaps the most important decade. I think you did a football prediction type show, In Between Records, more or less invented that, or the first time it was done in Des Moines at any rate. And your brother joined in on that?
Yes, as a matter of fact, that's how it started, that they then gave him something to do. He was in the studio, and when I was making my predictions on Friday night for the Saturday games, now they were going to come out, I'd see him shaking his head that I was wrong on one, and he was sitting in front of a microphone, as you are, opposite me, just visiting and doing it. And I said, my brother's here with me, and he seems to disagree with it. And I asked him, I said, well, who and why do you think that such and such a team is going to win? Well, we finished the program with a conversation between us. And then Peter MacArthur very generously, knowing that he was out of school and out of work, gave him a fee for, and we turned over the football predictions to him and the scores.
You did a lot of baseball games. A lot of our listeners don't have any idea of doing a baseball game from a ticker tape, but you did hundreds.
Yes.
A lot of the Cubs games, both here and in Des Moines, I think.
Yeah.
One of the best stories is the poor fellow that was up hitting all the foul balls when the ticker tape went down.
Yes, I had an operator on the other side of the window, and he had the earphones on and was getting the Morse code from the ballpark, and with a typewriter he would tap off what the play was, send it through to me, and I would, it'd have to come through pretty worked down. For example, he'd hand me a slip of paper that said S1C. You can't sell any Wheaties saying S1C. So I would say, Dean comes out of the windup, here comes the pitch, and it's a called strike, breaking over the corner to a batter, and so forth. And on this particular day, it was ninth inning, tied up between the Cubs and Cards and Billy Jergis at bat. And I saw Curly typing, so I waited, and he starts shaking his head, and I thought it must be some sensational play. But when the slip came to me, it says, the wire's gone dead. Well, in those days, there wasn't one fella broadcasting games as there are today. There were a dozen stations doing the same game. And I knew that if I said, we've got to play a musical interlude, I'd lose the audience. So when he handed me this, I had a ball on the way to the plate. So I had Jergis foul it off. And then I looked back, and he just shrugged. And so I thought, well, that's one thing doesn't get in the scorecard. So I took a chance, and I had Billy foul off another one. Then he fouled one that only missed being a home run by a foot. And then I described the two kids over behind third that got in a fight over the ball, the foul ball that had gone in the stands. And I was having Dean pitch very slowly. He was rubbing the rosin bag all the time and shaking off signs. And pretty soon I'm really beginning to sweat, because I think now if I tell them, they'll know that I've been stalling here, that this hasn't been true. And just then Curly started typing. And when he handed me the slip of paper, I could hardly broadcast for giggling. It said Jurgis popped out and the first ball pitched. But you know, there was no record of such a thing, but for days I'd meet people on the street who'd stop me and say, is there any record of anyone ever hitting that many successive foul balls? And I'd say, it was quite a few, but I don't think there is any.
If we could talk a little bit about the drought. You've been through southern Illinois, and it looks pretty bad down there. What are your plans? I don't want to steal your thunder from the upcoming speech.
Well, right now, that's on the floor in the Congress, and we really have a bipartisan group together. And Secretary Ling, who's with me here, our Secretary of Agriculture, has been working on this and been working with the people on the Hill. And it's a program that is not going to invade and try to rewrite the farm legislation as it is, but is to provide for help, emergency help, to these farmers who are so beset by this drought all over the United States. The figures are astonishing. And what I saw down there in Illinois just shows that it is disaster. And so I think we're coming up with a program that will have bipartisan support. Right now, I'm a little edgy, as I told some of our press on this trip, that, you know, there are always some legislators that will have a favorite thing that they know they can't get passed by itself, and they will try to attach it to a sure thing bill like this as an amendment. And some of that's been going on, too. And I hope that we're successful in stopping that and getting to the business at hand.
How long do you think there will be to turn this around and get something signed?
Well, I think it's a very limited time. They know that there's a time pressure on it, and I think it's ready to go through. And of course, I'll sign it the minute it's delivered to me.
Okay. Well, speaking of time, the clock on the wall says we have just about run out of time. On behalf of the staff and management of WOC KIIK stations, we really are delighted that you could be here with us. We appreciate it.
Well, I'm very pleased to have been here, too, and I know what it means about getting off on time, so I'll try to be. I've usually been, I'm used to being on the side of the table that you're on, asking the questions.
Perhaps next year, if you have nothing to do.
Well, I thank you.
I thank you very much. The President of the United States, Ronald Reagan.
Well, we're going to join Carla Christensen live back at WOC in a minute, but wouldn't it be something if President Reagan did decide to come to WOC and work as a sports announcer or as a newsman after he retires from the presidency, Carla? That would be something.
November, don't you think it would be the perfect idea for him to come back here and offer us some of that talent again in the Quad Cities?
Well, I wonder if he'd consider a job as a reporter here at Channel 4. I think we could use it.
I don't think, though, he would consider it today. To stand out here in this heat, as Jeff said over at the airport, it may be 100, but it feels like 130 out here.
Now what, Carla? The president, has he indicated he's ready to depart WOC Radio, or is he going to stay there for a while?
No, as we understand it, he's going to depart quickly to go over to Palmer Auditorium. As you can see perhaps behind me, they're starting to move the media again out into the motorcade, and they're starting to stand up on the backs of their station wagons as they follow him when they drive. Perhaps if we want to zoom in a bit here and we can get a closer shot of that motorcade starting to set up. They're starting to filter out. I'm sure that they're not ready to be leaving the air conditioning inside the WOC KIIK studios any faster than they have to be leaving that air conditioning.
You mean those media people would stay in there and loaf inside in the air conditioning as long as they could?
I would think so. I would think so.
Well, isn't that interesting that the best way to know where the president's going to be is watch the national media camera people?
There you go. They have special privilege. Of course, you know, the Secret Service doesn't know any of us, so we have to be kept at a distance. But we're allowed to have one pool camera in that we're all sharing. Of course, the national media travels with him all the time. He knows them all by name. And he did say that he had talked with the national media and was a little edgy about this drought issue and about the political ramifications of trying to move it through the chambers. Now, we are not quite sure how long it will take him to come out, but we can hear the helicopter circling overhead. Here come the motorcycles lining up, and they're beginning, it looks like, to put the hoods down on the police cars. They had the hoods up for a long period of time, trying to keep them cool. They were keeping the air conditioners running. You know what else is amazing, Phil, is that these Secret Service men have remained in full suit and tie all morning. They were here before we arrived at 9 a.m. and they have been here. Now, some police officers are saying hello to me here. Perhaps you can hear that off in the distance as they get ready. Maybe we can pan off and take a look at the dwindling crowd. People did not stay around and wait for the president to come back out. I guess they figured he was inside that bulletproof limousine and they were not able to get a really good shot of him. We can see just a few of the stragglers. There are many more people across the street, and we'll take a look at some of those folks as soon as the motorcade begins to move. But it looks like it may be just a little bit.
Well, the Secret Service there in their full suits and ties, they're probably also wearing, or some of them, bulletproof vests, adding to their discomfort, I would imagine. And I wonder if even the president isn't wearing a bulletproof vest. I understand that's a standard part of his wardrobe since the assassination attempt a few years ago.
That's correct, and not only do they probably have those bulletproof vests on, but they have radio equipment. Of course, they are all wired with microphones and earpieces. They also have their firearms on them, and as you know, during one of those assassination attempts, miraculously, Uzis appeared on the street as they went to protect the president. They're fully armed and ready at any time, although they look like some men just standing around keeping cool.
Well, you know, as uncomfortable as it might be for you and for the president and for the people traveling in his party, it does help point home the fact that we are in a very hot, dry spell here, and the drought is very serious, urgent business.
It is, and as we mentioned before, President Reagan made that reference to the Las Vegas crap table looking like a guaranteed income when it came to farmers. There's no doubt about it. The farmers are in a very serious situation now, serious enough that it demands the President of the United States' attention, and of course that bipartisan group of people working on the drought situation is what this visit is all about.
Vicki Palmer Miller said this would have been her father's proudest moment, and that's in a whole lifetime of probably very many proud moments.
He's a man who achieved a great deal, David Palmer, of course, building of the Palmer School of Chiropractic. And did you know that WOC stands for World of Chiropractic? Vicki Palmer Miller also mentioned Peter MacArthur, who was the program director who hired President Reagan, and he had that very famous voice that came on and started every program that was broadcast out of WOC. WOC Davenport, where the West begins and where the tall corn grows. That's the man who managed to hire Dutch Reagan to work here so many years ago, back in 1932.
Who are those motorcycle police officers? Are they local? Are they
Yes,
Davenport?
they are. Those are Davenport police officers. Dave Struckman, who's the head of the traffic unit, and I see a couple of other of his motorcycle police officers. A trained unit. They often work in the parades here, and they do local motorcycle traffic patrol. But of course, everyone's on special duty today, and a lot of these officers are working their day off.
Well, it's an opportunity for the local police departments, sheriff's departments to strut their stuff, you know, shine up their brass and get out and be in the public eye and get some well-deserved attention.
Now, I seem to be losing some of my own audio, but I'm not sure if you can still...
Carla, I hear you fine.
Okay, great, great.
Loud
Here we
and
go.
clear,
Here goes the motorcade, the state police. There comes the limousine first. Now, the limousine with the high top back is the one that President Reagan is in. It's the limo with the high top back, the second one with the flags on it, and maybe we can get him to wave as he comes through. There he is on this side. There's the president right there. He's looking to the people on the other side. Rather than wave to the cameras, he's waving to all of those people across the street. They're screaming at him now, and off he goes. You can see some of, I'm sure, the live trucks set up there. He is headed now down toward Locust Street, where they will turn and head for Palmer Auditorium, and on to the speech at Palmer College of Chiropractic.
Well, Carla, it's been very interesting talking with you for the last several minutes. Thank you very much for your reporting. And we're going to sell some commercials now. We're going to take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll go live to Palmer College, the next stop on the President's busy day in the Quad Cities. Stay tuned. President Reagan is now headed for Palmer College, where he's expected to give a major policy speech on the drought. And farmers are anxiously awaiting the president's speech, hoping to get news that help is on the way. Steve Bush is a newer farmer working here on his father's land, and he says although the crops received a few sprinkles with this morning's rain, the losses continue to add up. And here's what he hopes President Reagan has to say.
I would like to hear him say that they are going to help the farmers. There is going to be a program or some type of payments to help farmers get through this year and into next year.
You do think that the federal government can help somehow?
I think they can. They've provided us with payments and programs in the past to keep us farming. I'm sure they're going to not let the breadbasket of the world go broke.
Well, the suspense will be over in just a few minutes when the President arrives at Palmer College to deliver his address. At Palmer College, the President will be speaking before an audience of about 1,200 invited guests. They're mostly members of the Chamber of Commerce and their friends. Volunteers from the Chamber have been working long hours the past few weeks coordinating all of this, and Kathy Randall spoke with one weary but enthusiastic volunteer.
Chamber of Commerce. I'm sorry, they're sold out.
All 1,200 tickets to President Reagan's luncheon are spoken for.
Are you a chamber member?
Veda Reed has been volunteering for the chamber to get things in order for the presidential visit. Her day begins at 8 o'clock. On the phone with White House staff at least 3 times, working out the details, press credentials, vehicles, a welcome banner, and much more.
Program, tickets, congressional invitations.
She's also busy transforming a storage room at Palmer Auditorium into a presidential holding room. And one of the hardest things on her to-do list, finding thousands of dollars of blue velvet draping.
There's the draping that goes from the podium back to the holding rooms. There's the draping in the holding rooms to cover the walls.
She says it's the excitement and adrenaline pumping through her body that is keeping her going at this point. It should all be worth it. And finally, she says, if you aren't one of the lucky 1,200 ticket holders, there is a waiting list. But the chance of someone giving up their presidential pass isn't very good. Kathy Randall, 4 News, Davenport.
Well, the President's motorcade has not yet arrived at Palmer College, but Kathleen Seith is there. You've been there a couple hours, right, Kathleen?
How you doing, Phil? It's a little hard to hear you here because we've got the 4th Army Band from Fort Sheridan, Illinois, playing some music. They've been practicing all day, and they sound just great.
Well, I've been waiting to hear a band.
The blue velvet and the banners, everything's up. It looks just beautiful. We've got about 1,200 people here, actually a little bit more. In fact, I heard somebody talking to one of the coordinators earlier saying they thought they ran out of programs, which would be an amazing feat. You'd think they'd have planned that far ahead. A little earlier in his remarks, Harry Hoyt with Quad City Vision for the Future said, the Quad Cities is now an exciting place to live. You can sure tell that by today. The excitement level is up, and it's a lot of fun here. It's fairly cool inside, too, because we got some air conditioning going.
You mean there have been speeches at the Palmer College before now, before the President's arrival? Some people have been speaking? Mr. Hoyt, you mentioned?
Yeah, just barely. It's a little hard with all the music and everything. I'm sorry, did you ask a question?
Well, I was wondering, you mentioned somebody else made some remarks in a speech. Have there been speeches at Palmer College already this afternoon?
Yeah, actually, all the members of the local chambers of commerces have spoken. Are we getting some audio feedback here?
No, I'm hearing you fine. Loud and clear.
One had mentioned, too, a lot of people will criticize President Reagan for his defense spending, but one member of the Bettendorf Chamber of Commerce said that actually the President's defense spending has helped the Quad City area, and he was talking about the Rock Island Arsenal, which is right now our single largest employer. So he said that the money that the President has spent on defense certainly has come back to the Quad Cities in the forms of jobs.
Well, Kathleen, can your cameraman pan around a little bit and show us some of the scenery?
Sure. Well, you know, Phil, I don't know what you had for lunch, but the people here had some chicken. I saw kind of potatoes on their plates and coleslaw, fresh fruit. Sure look good. They treat the press really well. We've got some lemonade, iced tea, and everything. It's been a fairly nice day here.
And you're packed there like a sardine on that table full of media.
Yeah, you bet. It was just about 15 minutes ago all the national media came running in here. They've got all their slots all set up. Of course, local people, the newspapers and photographers, we've been here since about 11 o'clock this morning, but it's been nice meeting everybody. And actually today, you see a lot of people sitting down. They're standing room only. We've got people over here on the sides, over by the bleachers, standing up, applauding for the band.
Yeah, I've been wondering when there was going to be a band. You know, whenever the president visits, you've got to have a band somewhere, although at this point I'm a little glad they're taking a break.
Yeah, well, it is a little bit hard to hear when they're playing that much, but they are terrific. They've come a long way, Fort Sheridan, to bring us this music today, and I always enjoy listening to bands too, just like you, Phil.
Well, Kathleen, tell us what's going to happen there. Now, you say there have been some speeches already by, by some people in the chambers of commerce. Do they have a full program for the president? And while you're speaking...
Well, actually, I believe that once the president gets here, it's going to be his program. They'll probably just introduce him. In fact, I just got word that he's arrived, and he ought to be walking in any minute.
Kathleen,
they'll introduce him, and they'll leave the remarks up to him, and he'll speak through the rest of the afternoon, about 15 minutes or so, and then take off for the airport. So we're going to try and catch him as he walks in. Just before lunch began, there was an invocation, and the prayer was for rain. And isn't it funny, Phil, that this morning we got rain just as the president's about to come to the Quad Cities?
Well, the president has arrived at Palmer Auditorium, Kathleen. His motorcade, at least we were just looking at the police cars in the motorcade arriving. We think the president will be there any second now.
Okay, well, I'm waiting excitedly. This is terrific. Okay, we got word that he's just at the back door. I don't know which direction he's going to be coming through, but this will be my first speak at the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. So.
Well, Kathleen, I've been kidding the other reporters on our live shots about shouting a question at the president. No one has been able to get close enough to do that.
Are you daring me to do that, Phil?
Well, I'm not daring you exactly, but...
I don't know. If this band keeps playing, I don't think the person next to me can hear me. Hardly you can hear me, I think. I don't know. We're pretty far back from the president, so it would be difficult to get any questions across.
Can you see who's coming in there, Kathleen?
Pardon me?
Can you see the people coming in the back door?
Yeah, I see Governor Branstad, I believe, just walked in. No, I'm mistaken. It's somebody who looks just like him.
Guy with a mustache, but it's not the governor.
Now, we do have some local politicians here, and I'll tell you, this is not a partisan event, Phil. We got Democrats from Rock Island's mayor is here. And
there's the Secretary of Agriculture, Richard Ling, walking in. Can you see him?
Terrific, walking up and sitting down in the front there. We've got some newspaper photographers pulling into the front, too. I hope they don't block our view.
The gentleman with the glasses and the gray hair is Richard Ling, the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture.
I believe he has sat down, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's seated now.
We've been joined by several distinguished guests to congratulate the President. I'm pleased to recognize Secretary Richard Ling, U.S. Secretary of Agriculture.
Do you recognize that speaker, Kathleen?
Yes, I believe that that's John Gardner, the President of the Davenport Chamber of Commerce.
Congresswoman Lynn Martin. And Mr. Dean Kleckner of the American Farm Bureau Federation. Welcome to the Quad Cities. We also now have been joined by our good friend who has played a big part in all of today's excitement, Vicki Palmer Miller, limited partner in Signal Hill Communications and chairman of the Board of Trustees of Palmer College of Chiropractic. Vicki, welcome. Other distinguished guests now will join us on the platform. First, let's welcome Iowa Congressman Jim Leach. Jim, it's good to see you. Our two governors also have arrived to help us celebrate this memorable afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce to you the Honorable James Thompson, Governor of Illinois. Governor Thompson, welcome. And the distinguished Governor of the state of Iowa, the Honorable Terry Branstad. Governor Branstad.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
We are very pleased that President Reagan's busy schedule allowed him time to be here with us this afternoon. Earlier today, the President dedicated the new Signal Hill Communications Facility and spent some time on the air with WOC and KIIK audiences. It is indeed my great honor to once again welcome back to the Quad Cities WOC's most famous alumnus. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the President of the United States.
Thank you. Well, you did that. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, thank you, Vicki Palmer Miller, Governor Branstad, Governor Thompson, Congressman Leach, and the President of the Chamber of Commerce, John Gardner. And I know also that here, and not on the dais, but here with us also is our Secretary of Agriculture, Dick Ling, and the Congresswoman that represents my hometown district in Illinois, Lynn Martin. So, and all of you, thank you all very much. I can't tell you the wave of nostalgia that swept over me this afternoon arriving here in Davenport. There's a strength, a serenity, and a peace of mind that comes to a man when he returns to his roots, to the places he started out. And that's how I feel whenever I return to this part of the country and to this town. Now, I have to warn you that while I intend to speak about serious issues of the present and the future today, the kinds of things people come to hear presidents speak about, well, you're going to have to pay admission to hear it. And that's by listening politely while I tell you an old story or two about this wonderful town and the days when it was the center of the world to me. Of course, that goes back to when it wasn't the Quad Cities, it was the Tri-Cities. I'd just graduated from college and the Depression was on. And I decided that the way I wanted to start working was as a radio announcer. A decision my dad accepted with skepticism, but support. So he lent me the family car, and We mapped out a one-day tour of the nearest stations to Dixon, Illinois, and Davenport was just 75 miles from home, so it was my first trip. And the station here was WOC, and you may know that the call letter stood for World of Chiropractic. And it was founded by Mr. and Mrs. Miller's, I should say, grandfather, a great and gracious gentleman, Colonel B.J. Palmer, who also owned the Palmer School of Chiropractic. And the WOC was located on the top floor of the school and shared time with WHO in Des Moines. I had a trial run as a $10 a game play-by-play announcer covering the Iowa Hawkeyes, and then when the season ended with a couple of months of waiting to see if a permanent job would open up, and finally the program director, a Scotsman, I'll always have a soft spot in my heart for Peter MacArthur, gave me my break. I got $100 a month, which to me was big money, and some good lessons. For example, once each week late at night, we would present a program of live romantic organ music from the Runge Mortuary. Yeah. Well, it was about as far as you could get from, say, a top 40s show today. We got the half hour of live music free, and the mortuary got a discreet plug when we mentioned that it was the source of the program. Well, the first time that I was scheduled for the period when that program was on, no one informed me of that business arrangement. And my dramatic instincts rebelled against mentioning the mortuary in connection with such favorites as "Drink to Me Only with Thine Eyes." So that night, we got the music, and the mortuary got left out. I was fired. I was also assigned to show the ropes to my replacement, which led to one of my first brushes with miracles. My replacement thought I was only temporary, and had been hired knowing that he was coming on, that he was going to come to work at a certain time. And when he learned it wasn't true, he demanded a contract as a guarantee of his security. Well, in those days, that was unheard of. And so, miracle of miracles, just when I thought I was all washed up, the station decided to give me a new lease on life because I hadn't asked for a contract. Now, I said there was a lesson in this. I complained at the time to a friend about what had happened and about how I hadn't been told things, and this friend didn't commiserate. He said exactly the right thing. He reminded me that I was nothing but a head. He said, "You now have experience which you never had before. You can walk into another radio station and even introduce yourself as a sports announcer." I'd broadcast 4 football games already. I took his advice to heart and started doing my work a whole lot better. And pretty soon all talk of finding another job had faded. So you see, I learned something here about being grateful for your opportunities, about not blaming others for your mistakes, and about putting things in perspective. Simple lessons, but the kind that most young men and women need to learn at some time or other. And what can I say for having taught me then, but what I've said thousands of times over the years in my heart? Thank you, Davenport, and thank you, WOC. Well, of course, Davenport and the Quad Cities area have changed a lot during the years since then. Generations of young men and women have come here to get their start and grown as I did for a time with the city. I know you've just been hearing about how the city has grown recently and about how you brought your unemployment rate down to less than half of what it was, how thousands of new jobs have blossomed in the area, how whole new industries like tourism have grown, and how you've transformed the riverfront. There's been a dream here in the Quad Cities area, a determination and a hope. And from it and what was born in your hearts, you have rebuilt these communities. But in a way, that's been happening all over America. Last week, we learned that the nation's unemployment rate has dropped to the lowest it's been in almost a decade and a half. In the month of June alone, America created 100,000 new jobs in manufacturing and construction and more than 200,000 jobs in services. And by the way, what I'm
told you've just heard about the Quad Cities is true for the nation as well. The great majority of the new service jobs are well-paying and in places like stores and doctors' offices, hospitals and banks, and insurance companies and real estate brokers and developers. One respected private economist looked at the number of new jobs in June and had just one word. He said, stunning. These are gains you'd expect to see when an expansion is in its very early stages, not when it's over 5 years old. But then I've always been partial to things that don't act their age. Of course, in Washington, we can't take too much good news all at once. So, ever since our expansion got rolling, the sages of the Potomac have been promising an expectant city that disaster was just around the corner. They've had a long wait, and I have a feeling they may have reached the bottom of the barrel on Monday when one Washington-edited newspaper reported on the economy's incredible strength under the headline, "Jobs Growth Fuels Fear of Recession." I knew there was something wrong when they stopped calling our recovery Reaganomics. What Washington too often doesn't understand, but I know you do, is that the source of our record-breaking expansion will not be found poring over the computer models and equations of high-priced consulting firms, but by peering into the American heart. And there you will find optimism about the future, trust in the strength of ordinary people, and faith in the power of freedom. I learned about these in Iowa and Illinois. And like belief in God, love of family, and hope in the human soul, they have a power no instrument can measure and no computer model can predict. But I promise you, as long as I'm president, they're a force that Washington will not forget. Now let me turn to an area where, on farms and ranches across the nation, our optimism is being tested. I remember that when I worked here in Davenport, Peter MacArthur would roll out that station's slogan in his rich Highland Scottish burr, "WOC Davenport, where the West begins in the state where the tall corn grows." But I saw earlier today that the corn isn't growing so tall this year. I visited the farm of Herman and Rick Crone, father and son, both of them farmers all their lives. They're farmers in southern Illinois, but it could as easily be in Iowa or Ohio or Indiana or the Dakotas or Alabama, in Texas or Tennessee. They had a pole set up in the cornfield. On the pole they'd marked where the corn should be by now. It isn't even 2/3 that high. Secretary Ling first brought the drought to my attention before most of the nation knew it was developing. Since then, he's briefed me 5 times, and today for a 6th. He's told me how hard the drought is hitting corn, soybeans, and other crops, about endangered herds, and about rivers, including the Mississippi. As I said at the Crone farm this morning, we can't bring the rain, but we can ease the pain, and that's what we've been doing. We've pulled together a government-wide drought command team, and we've swung into action. In nearly 2,000 counties in 37 states, we've allowed grazing and haymaking on land set aside in government crop reduction programs. In 181 counties in 11 states, we've also opened to grazing water bank land that is part of the federal water bank program. In over 700 counties in 25 states, we're selling government feed grain stockpiles to farmers at less than their cost to the government. Or, if farmers prefer, we're sharing the cost of purchasing feed from private sources to preserve breeding herds. Working with the states, we have set up a national hay hotline, and it's called HayNet, to put together those who have hay and those who need it. We've also set up a national drought hotline, and as of yesterday, that hotline had fielded over 5,000 calls. To boost meat prices as herds are being thinned, we've announced a $50 million purchase of hamburger and other meat for our food assistance program, and a $40 million credit line to Mexico for U.S. meat purchases. Many grain farmers don't know the full impact of the drought until close to harvest time. But in 80 counties, in 15 states, things were so bad so early that some farmers couldn't plant at all. We've made those farmers eligible to receive 92% of the projected deficiency payments on land that would have been planted. And for farmers who have crop insurance, we're making sure the claims will be handled quickly. Along our waterways, the Army Corps of Engineers has stepped up dredging. As of yesterday, they had 12 dredges at work on the most severely shoaled areas of our inland navigation system. They have other dredges ready in case things get worse. The Corps and the Coast Guard are working with barge operators to keep traffic on our rivers running smoothly and to spot problems in the channels. They've promised to keep the Mississippi open. In the West, we've opened the way for some interdistrict water sales, and we've pulled together teams to move along water sales, water transfers, and water banking. Across the nation, we're keeping a close eye on how much water, federal power, which is to say that we're making sure the federal tap doesn't drip. We've done all of this without special congressional action. The steps we've taken are the right steps. They fall within my authority as president, and I've gone ahead. But there are two big things we should be doing that we can't do until Congress gives the okay. I'm calling today for Congress to act quickly on comprehensive drought relief, disaster relief for all farmers, for all crops. Two steps are essential. The first is to help farmers who've received what are called advanced deficiency payments, advances on what the farmer expects to receive from the government after harvest. Well, as things stand today, many drought-ravaged fans will have to refund this money. I endorse forgiveness of these payments in the appropriate circumstances. We also want to help farmers whose crops are not covered by that federal program, but who feel this disaster as well. I endorse comprehensive disaster relief for non-program crops. And there may be other things we should do. I'm also announcing today that I have directed Secretary Ling to lead a fact-finding team next week, which will visit places around the country that are suffering from the drought. The team will include people from the Department of Agriculture and other agencies that have been part of my Interagency Drought Policy Committee. Just as I have today, they'll see and hear firsthand what the drought is doing to crops and livestock. I'm determined to get relief to drought-stricken farms. Our administration has been working with Governor Branstad, Governor Thompson, the other farm state governors, as well as the leaders of both houses of Congress. And let me give you a few common sense rules that I believe should guide us as we hammer out details of how we help. Relief should go to those who have been hurt most. It should be structured so that farmers who've had the foresight to take out crop insurance don't end up asking why they bothered. We should keep an eye out for unintended consequences, booby traps in what we do. For example, we should make sure that the way we give relief doesn't give anyone an incentive to plow under crops that could have been harvested. We should also keep in mind that we have a deficit and a budget agreement with Congress, which means the government has to find money before it spends it. We should keep our eye on the ball. Drought relief should be just that, drought relief. No one in Washington should try to divert it to other ends, such as rewriting farm legislation already on the books. To try such a ploy would only delay the train that should be carrying help to farmers. And there's one other thing. Even in an election year, the drought is too big for partisanship. Politics must stop at the parched field's edge. As I said, our administration has been working with the leaders of both houses of Congress. We've all joined together to do what's best for the nation, and we should all pledge to keep it that way. We should be guided by the strength and straightforward decency of the people we're helping. But if I had my way, that would always be the guiding light in Washington. You know, I like to point out sometimes when people get flattering me about the economic expansion, the longest in the history of our nation that we're having. You know really what we did that made that come about? We just got out of your way. You did it, we didn't. This blessed nation has a strength, a vitality, and a wisdom that flows like the immense and powerful Mississippi. I remember when I first saw that river as a boy many years ago. It seemed like a great arm reaching from the heart of America to touch the world. Nothing was beyond the reach of its dreams. And today, many years later, I know that nothing is. For even when it's low, that old man river keeps flowing. And so too do the love and strength that come from deep in the heart of its country. That love and that strength have given the world a new birth of freedom, a new light unto the nations, a new hope for humanity. They flow in all seasons in such abundance and nowhere with so strong a current as here. And as one who's lived here and left and seen every part of the world, may I tell you that nowhere can you feel more strongly the force of Him who can go with me and stay with you and be everywhere for the good. Nowhere is the force of His love closer to the good earth and its people than here. I have to conclude with one little story I've waited a long time to tell because I figured it had to be told in Iowa. In 1949, for the first time in my life, I found myself in England. I was making a movie over there. And on weekends, never having been there, I would hire a driver and car and go out and see the countryside. And I'd made it plain to the driver, too, that I wanted to see, and don't think I have bad habits when I say this, but I wanted to see some of those 700-year-old pubs that you hear about. Well, I had a couple of people with me one weekend, and he took us and he apologized because the pub was only 400 years old. So we went in, and what we'd call it here is a mom and pop place. Elderly woman and her elderly husband, they were sole proprietors and hired help together, all together, just the two of them. And after a while, us talking among ourselves, she said to us, "You're Americans, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." "Oh," she says, "there were a great bunch of your chaps just down the road here during the war." She said, "They were based down there." And she said every night they would come in here and have a song fest. And by this time, she's not looking at us. She's kind of looking beyond us into memory. And pretty soon there's a tear there. And she said, "It was a Christmas Eve, and me and the old man were here all alone." She said, "They called me Mom, and they called him Pop." She said, "We were alone, and the door burst open, and in they come. And they had presents for us." And then, now the tears were very evident. She said, "Big, strapping lads they was, from a place called Iowa." And every time I tell it, I have a terrible feeling that I'm going to imitate her with regard to the tears. I could just see those big strapping lads, as we all can, from a place called Iowa. Well, thank you all very much, and I can't tell you what this day has meant to me, and God bless you all.
Kathleen Seith, can you hear me?
That was the President of the United States. He was talking about what he plans to do for farmers in this drought disaster situation. Among other things, he said that he wants a comprehensive drought disaster relief.
But we certainly don't want to make that mistake when you come back. So on behalf of the Chambers of Commerce of the Quad Cities and of all of these fine people here, we'd like to present you with this little memento of your visit.
I was never as young as I am in some of those pictures.
Okay. Well, as you can see, the president is leaving. I mentioned earlier that what he was talking about as far as protection for our area farmers, he said he does want to help farmers who received their advanced deficiency payments. That is, the president wants to forgive those payments. There had been talk that farmers who had gotten money from the federal government might have to pay it back, which would put them in a very tight financial situation. The president, also said he wants to help farmers who are not covered by government programs. And he asked that Secretary Ling get together a task force, a fact-finding team to go around the country and take a look at the situation.
Kathleen, I don't know if it's possible for you to gauge the reaction of the farmers and other people that were in the audience to hear that speech, but did it seem like they were impressed with the things that he proposed about the drought?
Well, it was hard to tell, of course, because all the faces are facing away from me. I think everybody was impressed to see the president, but as far as, sorry, I'm getting conflicting messages here. It was hard to see, Phil, what people actually thought, but I think they were surprised about the advanced deficiency payments, and that certainly will be a big help, and I'm sure that was well received. Also, his promise to give federal support in areas where there aren't programs right now, other coverage. That would be a great help. I don't know what this task force, the fact-finding team that Secretary Ling will be taking around will find, but perhaps, again, too, that will provide more help. I think people were surprised to some extent to how far the president is willing to go financially. He did mention, of course, though, we're in a deficit and we've got to find the money before we can spend it, which is the key here.
Well, Kathleen, we've switched outside.
Waiting outside with his motorcade. We can sample a few more opinions here, Philip. We got some time real quick. Excuse me, sir. Can you tell us what you think of the president's speech?
Very good, very good.
Are you impressed with his plans for farmers?
Definitely.
Well, I think the warm reception, of course, is in part because we're talking about the President of the United States, and people are always impressed to see the President. But coming from his past policies, as I had mentioned earlier, of kind of letting farmers take care of themselves and the government getting away from subsidized farming, there were some interesting statements today, Phil.
Well, we'll see how this stacks up in the days and the weeks to come and see what remedies are really put into place and what passes the Congress, which he's quick to point out he needs congressional action before he can do any of the things that he proposes.
Right, and of course, as he proposed too, he said we need to get relief to farmers who were hurt the most. Perhaps that's what Secretary Ling will do when he goes around with his task force, and it might be a little hard to decide who's been hurt the most and then who gets what kind of money. It's going to be a rather subjective decision-making process there. I don't know how that's going to work out.
Okay, Kathleen, now the people are filing out. We have a camera outside. We're trying to see if the president has left yet.
Okay.
We're seeing part of the motorcade there.
I believe, too, that Governor Jim Thompson will be leaving right away. We had hoped to get a chat with Governor Thompson about what the president had to say today. A little bit later, we are going to try and talk with Governor Terry Bradstand and see what he thought of the president's remarks. As the president also mentioned, too, he called on Congress to rewrite farm legislation. That would be quite a thing to undertake, and I'm not sure exactly what the president meant on that. He was speaking more in broad terms than specifics today, other than certain things as far as the advanced payments, advanced deficiency payments to farmers and whatnot. I think people are frankly relieved, Phil, to be filing out right now because it got progressively warmer. With the lights on in here, you could barely feel the air conditioning, but it doesn't look like it's going to be too much nicer when they go outside.
Well, it was the story about the boys from Iowa was mesmerizing. You, I'm sure if you were in there, almost weren't aware of the heat or the humidity. He's a great storyteller.
That's one thing you have to say about President Reagan. He has a way of telling a story that just totally captivates the audience. The place was just quiet and listening. And yeah, that big strapping boy from Iowa really caught a lot of hearts here, I'm sure.
Well, we're switching back outside now so we can catch a glimpse, hopefully, of the president as he leaves. We can see the crowd of people outside.
So the president said he's been working with the governors and with Congress to try and get relief to our nation's farmers. He said also today, Phil, we mentioned this yesterday in a story we did about the drought insurance problem. The president said farmers should be covered by that drought insurance. Now, again, I don't know what specifics he's planning, but as the story is that farmers took out drought insurance coverage and then were later told that they weren't covered. The insurance companies have said they'll give them back their premiums, but the Iowa insurance commissioner says, I don't want you to just give back premiums. I want double the premiums, or I want them to be covered. And the president said he wanted them to be covered too. So I don't know if he's going to step in there and do something with these insurance companies. There have been protests about that. Indiana farmers have filed a lawsuit about their drought insurance or lack thereof. So be interesting to see if President's going to get in on that whole controversy.
Okay.
Well, the band is going to continue to play as people file out of Palmer Auditorium here. Believe it or not, in just 5 minutes now, Phil, it's cooled off since people have left.
Well, all those warm bodies.
Very exciting day for the folks here. I'm Kathleen Seith with the 4 News Live Eye at Palmer Auditorium. Back to you, Phil.
Kathleen Seith at Palmer Auditorium. We now want to get some expert insight into exactly what the president had to say and how helpful that might be. Dr. David Donnell from Augustana College is with us. Dr. Donnell, thank you for joining us. The president had a few things to say. Mostly he talked, it seemed to me, about things that have already been done, but he had a few things to say about what he thinks should be done if he gets congressional help. What do you think? Are they significant remedies?
Clearly, yes. The Congress has already taken the initiative and begun to move legislation through, and the president is going to accept some form of new and further relief programs for the farmers as soon as Congress provides the big money that is necessary.
Well, is the issue, it seems like what you're saying, the Congress is willing, the issue has been, is the president willing to endorse such legislation?
Yeah, I think that people do wait to see, because this president has been an advocate of deregulation, of he said, getting government out of the way, that type of policy. So people wait to hear if he's going to endorse a new government program, but clearly in this case he has taken the view that government does have to get involved.
The idea of having a team of fact finders go around and it's kind of like, I don't know, you wonder about setting up a committee to study a problem.
There's certainly no question that that is symbolic to some extent. It is meant to communicate concern, but then that is what the president is so good at, that communication of a feeling of concern. He knows that just a $5.5 billion spending program isn't the whole ball of wax. You also need to communicate and rebuild the confidence that the American system is going to recover from this, and so that's part of it for him.
One of the things the president said is the drought is too big for partisanship. Was there any partisanship in his visit today, so close to the end of his presidency and so close to the general election, where I guess he wants George Bush to take up the banner?
Well, I think that there's no question that the president hopes that George Bush will be elected, and there's no question that this sort of trip will help George Bush by showing the president to be continuing concern for ongoing problems. Bush doesn't have to criticize the president in any way on farm policy. He can say, I go right along with what the president's doing. That makes life better for George Bush, so there's certainly a kind of political element to all of this.
Overall, the president's visit and your impression of his day here?
Oh, I think he obviously enjoyed himself. There's a lot of personal connection in this for him, and that's the environment that he likes best. He wants to be able to communicate a personal message rather than a political or an ideological message, and he does that obviously very well, and that's what he got to do today, so he's a happy man, I'm sure.
Okay, Dr. David Donnell, thank you very much for being with us and sharing your expertise. We're looking again live now at the exterior of Palmer Auditorium. I'm not sure if the president has come out yet or not. He has gone.
There goes the motorcade.
And there goes the motorcade driving away, headed for the Quad City Airport, and we will go live to the Quad City Airport to watch the president's departure, see if he has anything more to say as he leaves, but before that we'll take this commercial break. We'll be right back. President Reagan is now headed to the Quad City Airport, where he'll climb aboard Air Force One and go back to Washington. The last time President Reagan was in our area was in 1984. He came to visit his boyhood home in Dixon, Illinois, and Jim Letourneau looks back at that day in February 1984.
It was miserably cold that February morning in Dixon, Illinois, when Ronald Reagan came home, if only for a day. It was the occasion of his birthday, and accompanied by the First Lady and his brother Moon, the president entered a house which he hadn't lived in since the late 1920s. What Reagan saw was his former home reconstructed after a fire in 1983, which almost destroyed the landmark, the two-story white frame house where he spent his formative years. The Dixon community as a whole contributed private funds to restore the home to its original condition, complete with furniture and carpeting from the period, little pieces of memorabilia and pictures of Dutch and his brother Moon scattered around the house. When Ron and Moon stood on that porch together back in 1984, who knows what thoughts were going through their mind? Similar thoughts, perhaps, to those Reagan has on his visit to Davenport, where he got his start in a long career. Where has the time gone? Yes, Mr. President, there is no place like home. Jim Letourneau, 4 News, Rock Island.
Well, in just a few minutes, the President's motorcade will arrive at the Quad Cities Airport. There are quite a few cars in that motorcade carrying dignitaries, Secret Service agents, and one vehicle is a local ambulance full of emergency equipment and staffed by paramedics. Carla Christensen reports the Secret Service is prepared for any medical emergency that might still arise.
This is a scene many of us remember. It is the nightmare of the Secret Service, and they are making sure that the President will not move a muscle in our city without this medic ambulance only seconds away. Kevin Tackus and his partner will shadow Reagan along with the President's personal physician and paramedic. Tackus has handled all of Bush's vice presidential visits to the Quad Cities, but he says preparation for the President is much more intense.
Preparation, actually, from the medical standpoint, takes approximately a week. However, the other preparation takes quite a bit longer for the security measures and such.
Did they run a security check on your background?
Yes,
You came up clean?
Hopefully, I think.
Tackus says he worries less about an assassination attempt than a medical problem, especially in this heat. But once inside the medic unit, the President will receive the same care and treatment any of us would receive in an emergency. There's one difference. He does say that they'll be driving the newest of the paramedic units.
I'm excited. I think it's a once-in-a-lifetime type thing in this situation, and it puts you in the spotlight quite a bit, but I'm real excited. I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Carla Christensen, 4 News.
Jeff Rudolph is live at the Quad Cities Airport, where I guess Air Force One is gassed up and ready to go. Jeff?
Air Force One is getting ready to take off from the Quad City Airport. I understand the President is still a few minutes away from arriving here at the airport. Of course, the dignitaries are starting to gather right now at the airport. We see all these Secret Service agents getting ready and trying to make the last-minute preparations on the President's trip to the Quad Cities.
Okay, Jeff, we'll come back and talk to you in just a few minutes, but before that, we'll take this short break for a commercial. Well, momentarily, President Reagan's caravan of automobiles will arrive at the Quad City Airport. That's where Jeff Rudolph is. Jeff, explain to us what we're seeing right now.
I'm sorry, Phil, could you repeat that question?
The President has not arrived yet, is that correct?
Yes, the President has not arrived yet. We've had a couple of squad cars come into the airport, a Davenport squad car and a Scott County squad car, and Sheriff Forrest Rashcraft stepped out of the Scott County squad car. Apparently it's going to be any minute now before the President arrives at Air Force One to finish off his trip to the Quad Cities.
Who are the people standing around? Can you identify any of them? I see some people standing there at the steps of Air Force One.
Yes, we have a couple of Air Force personnel out there and some Secret Service people. Now we have a motorcade coming into view here. We see the some of the policemen on the motorcycles, and now we have Iowa State Patrol, and now we have the limousines coming into view. As you can see, limousine is passing behind Air Force One, and that will double back around. We should be seeing the limousine again in a matter of seconds.
Well, let's see who's riding with the President this time. On the way in from the airport, Governor Terry Branstad of Iowa and Governor Jim Thompson were on board with the President. Let's see who gets out this time.
And Branstad met Reagan here at the airport and then got in with the limousine. I see in the back seat now we've got the President and also Iowa Governor Branstad. Just as they left the Quad City Airport, here they are in the back seat together discussing probably the drought issues and maybe a few other things.
So Jim Thompson is not in the car?
As far as I understand, Jim Thompson is not at the airport. I have not seen him at the airport. Here comes the president. And Branstad. After a final wave, the president getting ready to board Air Force One. Okay, that appears, there's Governor Thompson. President going back to Andrews Air Force Base in Washington. Only a 2.5-hour visit to the Quad Cities. Got a lot accomplished in those 2.5 hours, apparently. Nancy is back at the White House.
Who's he talking to, Jeff? Is somebody hollering questions at him? He's yelling at somebody.
I can't hear. Somebody in the network news crew answered or asked a question. We're just too far away here to get any kind of a response. Now we have some of the crowd clapping and waving, and the dignitaries waving at President Reagan. President Reagan waving back. And those jet engines revving up. There's White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater entering the plane. And the rest of the president's staff. Now, the governors of Iowa and Illinois, Branstad and Thompson, they are walking away from the plane. We will try to get an interview with either one of the governors. If we're lucky enough, we'll try to get both of the governors to respond to the president's trip today and whether they were satisfied with the president's response to this record drought.
Well, it would be interesting to hear what they have to say. I'm sure that it will come out sooner or later. The sooner the better.
Definitely. Yes, the president, it'll take about 2 hours for him to get back to Andrews Air Force Base in Washington. You can see now the ramp is being pulled away from Air Force One. The crowd of dignitaries beginning to thin out here at the airport.
This is a Boeing 707, or what model plane is this? Have you learned that, Jeff?
This is a Boeing 707. They're looking to rehabilitate a Boeing 747 sometime in the future, and that would, of course, would be the new Air Force One, or some kind of title.
I guess there are actually a couple of Air Force Ones. Whatever airplane the president happens to be in gets that designation, Air Force One.
As the jet engines begin to rev up, it's becoming more and more difficult to hear. These are extremely loud engines, and it looks like they're getting ready to take off.
Jeff, I understand that the departure of Air Force One could also create some delays for airline passengers coming into the Quad Cities. In order to clear the airspace for Air Force One, all departing flights headed for the Quad Cities are delayed at their point of origin so that they will not interfere with the takeoff of Air Force One.
Well, I've already talked with some very frustrated travelers, and they're not at all happy. Some of them aren't President Reagan fans to begin with, and to have to go through some delays at an airport during the week, probably a busy business week for many of those people, it's very frustrating for those people, and they voice their opinions.
How substantial have the delays been? Are we talking about major blocks of time?
Not major blocks of time, but just enough to create enough of a nuisance.
Yeah.
You might be talking half hour to maybe even as long as 1 hour delays out here at the Quad City Airport, just for people who are either meeting relatives here or trying to take outgoing flights.
Overhead right now, are helicopters hovering, waiting to see that Air Force One gets off safely?
We've got at least one helicopter that's hovering. Now the plane is over at the other end there. You can see it's leaving the Quad Cities. You've got a helicopter that's over to the right of Air Force One. That's not going to be within view, but that one is probably over what you might call Airport Road. It's looking at the area, and they're trying to secure it as much as possible.
But there are no military aircraft, fighter planes, anything like that in the area?
Oh, no.
I don't suppose that's necessary.
Just MASH-type planes. That's all I've seen so
MASH-type
far.
planes? Now, what does that mean?
Well, the helicopter type.
Oh, I see.
You know what I mean.
MASH, the sitcom.
Yeah, just your basic military helicopter.
Yeah, I understand.
Actually, we were trying to make arrangements to have our own helicopter follow the president in his journey from the Quad City Airport over to the other locations, but the Secret Service did not allow us to do that. They don't take any chances when it comes to security, and they certainly don't with the helicopters and all the air traffic that's in the Quad Cities. There you see Air Force One. So now President Reagan back over to Andrews Air Force Base, over by the nation's capital, and President Reagan's trip to the Quad Cities over and done.
Okay, Jeff, you go and see if you can run down the governors, and we'll talk to you later at 6 o'clock. Thanks very much for a job well done. Well, as President Reagan wings it to the Andrews Air Force Base in Washington, D.C., we're going to conclude our live and continuous coverage of his visit to the Quad Cities. While he was here, he came to dedicate the WOC radio studios in Davenport, and he also came to give a speech on the drought. He said the drought is testing our optimism, but he offered a few pearls for hope, and he said he proposed some remedies that he think will help the farmers survive the current dry spell. And we'll have more on the president's visit, the impact of what he had to say, tonight on 4 News at 6 o'clock. Until then, I'm Phil Dawson, and have a good afternoon.
This has been a special 4 News live presentation of President Reagan's trip to the Quad Cities.